So, good afternoon, good morning. We'll start the next session now. And the theme of this session is very topical. It's a theme that's been running through most of the previous sessions. It's called Whatever Happened to Regional Capital, or India's quote unquote new capitalists. And we have three papers. The first one will be by Vijay Shankar, who's going to be speaking on his work looking at history of regional capital in Madhya Pradesh. Gaurav Bansal, who has been analyzing patterns of accumulation in Punjab, and Ravi Teja, who has been looking again back at the Andhra case, but in a different part of the Andhra region that has been then compared to what has been studied earlier. So I will start with Vijay Shankar, and I will really request you to keep to time so that we have enough time for discussion. I will give you a two-minute warning. I'll be sitting here and waving my hand. Okay.
Hello, everyone. The session on regional capital. So I'll be speaking about Madhya Pradesh. And my name is Vijay Shankar, as written there. I'm founder of one of these NGOs, CSOs working in Madhya Pradesh called Samajpati Sehog. We started it some 30 years ago, and it's located in the western part of Madhya Pradesh, Malwa. A lot of observation, though I'm talking about Madhya Pradesh in a very broad sweep and over the last 70 years or so. Many of my observations will be colored by what I've learned while working in Madhya Pradesh, in western part of Madhya Pradesh, Malwa to be precise. So, when you talk about patterns of regional accumulation, Madhya Pradesh doesn't often come in these discussions. It's not normally covered, and very few studies. You can count them on your finger. That kind of studies are there only of regional capital, particularly in Madhya Pradesh. But Indian capitalism has strong regional roots. So over time, some various forms of capitalism has emerged in Madhya Pradesh. That's the main theme I'm talking about. And what is their nature? There are vibrant accounts of the transition from agrarian surplus, how people accumulate agrarian surplus and then move to industry. Carol's work is there of Andhra, coastal capitalists of Andhra. Then Harish Damodaran's book on new capitalists. They all talk about how the transition from agriculture to industry using agrarian surplus has happened. But this has not happened in many other parts of India. Specifically, it has not happened in Madhya Pradesh. So that opens up a very interesting question. If the agrarian surplus, my first argument here is that agriculture has grown fast in Madhya Pradesh. So there is a surplus which is coming there. And if the surplus has not gone into industry, where is the surplus going? What are the forms that surplus is taking? So not having industry actually creates a kind of opens up a field for a wide set of questioning. But what are the other forms that we have? And my contention is that there are very interesting forms which are happening right now. And very few studies are there. So my plea at the end of the presentation will be that more people, more students, there are many students here, more of you can come to Madhya Pradesh and look at these aspects and study them and enrich our understanding of the process at work. Madhya Pradesh is a case of limited industrialization. There have been a huge effort of setting up industries in Madhya Pradesh right from 1956 onwards. When the Bhilai steel plant, the huge plant was set up in Raipur, which was in Chhattisgarh right now, but that was part of Madhya Pradesh then. Public sector investment was supposed to lead the whole process of industrial growth. That did not happen much. It remained islands of prosperity or industrialization. Then there's a major effort in the 70s as part of the industrial dispersion that industries are getting concentrated in few pockets. They should be dispersed into a larger geography. There was a committee set up for that. And there was a tax and subsidy scheme which came. Srinivasan was here yesterday. I've quoted his work. He did his work on that in part of area near Indore and Devas. Huge subsidies were given, even then industries didn't come. The share of industries there, it's not more than 9 or 10% at present in state domestic product. So industry growth has not happened. But what has actually grown in Madhya Pradesh are two clear forms of capital. One is agrarian capital and the other is commercial capital. So when you talk about agrarian capital, Madhya Pradesh became, I've given a little bit of background or it's important to understand. The states like Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, they are very constituted very differently from, let's say, Kerala or Karnataka or maybe Andhra Pradesh or something, because culturally these are very, very disparate units. We are all princely states and bit of a British empire in the middle, and they were all put together like a khichdi, amalgamation of units. And there's little coherence between them in terms of language, culture, memory, what Barbara mentioned a while ago. Agriculture was facing multiple constraints in Madhya Pradesh at the time of independence. There were extractive agrarian institutions that we know very well. Zamindari was there. Jagirdari was also there. Malgusari, the eastern part of Madhya Pradesh, central part of Madhya Pradesh, where Mekhala did her study. Narmada Valley, Malgusari was a very prominent form of landholding. And these were highly extractive institutions which actually took away the surplus from whatever surplus agriculture was producing. There was no scope for investment. There was huge inequality in landholding. I've given some numbers there, which was there in 1950s versus even today. And there was a huge environmental constraint. The water scarcity was a big factor because this whole Madhya Pradesh, the western part of Madhya Pradesh particularly, is located in a low rainfall area. Average rainfall is not more than 1,000 millimeters in a year. And rainfall is highly seasonal. So water scarcity and seasonality. These were the hallmarks of the agriculture in that area. And any growth of capitalism in agriculture was impossible without addressing these constraints. So what actually happened after, let's say, state formation took, consolidation took around 10 years. Around 1970 onwards, what happened was kind of some way of addressing these constraints. So I've written there carefully that agrarian capitalism developed by working around these constraints. These constraints were not removed, except perhaps the environmental one to some extent. Extractive feudal institutions are still there. But many of the, through land reform, these agrarian institutions like Zamindari, etc., they were ended by legislation. Now, we generally say land reform did not succeed in places like Madhya Pradesh. That may not be correct because it did succeed in terms of removing intermediaries, the Zamindars and Jagirdars and all, and breaking up their big estates into smaller ones. So that allowed many of the intermediate castes, the castes which are just below that, to come up. I'll come to that story in a while. There were many castes who were not so dominant position, but they were not Dalits, they were not Adivasi. They remain outside the whole circuit of accumulation. But removal of the intermediary, the top layer, the landlords so-called, to go to rural areas in Madhya Pradesh, you may not find landlord of the typical old 70s kind of landlord, you may not find. So removal of those gave a space to lower the intermediate caste to come up. And they led the whole process of agrarian transition. That's what I'm going to talk about. So the institutions were not removed. The social structure was not fundamentally changed, but still there was some change in the overall system. And the environmental constraint, particularly the water scarcity, was addressed partly initially through dam construction. After independence, a lot of dams were constructed in the Chambal Basin, in the northern part of Madhya Pradesh, etc. But the game changer came in the 1970s with the coming in of borewells, tubewells technology. It came into Malwa, western part of Madhya Pradesh, around 1975 or something. And along with it, soybean came as a big crop, a cash crop, entirely cash crop. There's no domestic consumption of soybean at that time. It was entirely promoted for the export market, for the production of oil seeds. That was that came in as a big game changer in the 1970s. And that changed the agricultural scenario of Madhya Pradesh. I mean, Mekla's PhD covers a lot of that work. The point here is also that agrarian capitalism was what grew after 1970s with the support of borewell. My paper has larger description of how it developed. Borewells came in first, soybean came in second, then it went into a soybean wheat kind of cycle, etc. What supporting the whole thing was the state's strong intervention. In industry, we saw state intervened and tried to do a lot of things, did not succeed. But in agrarian capitalism, state achieved remarkable success. Even as you speak, success is visible. It increased water by bringing borewells and creating canals and so on. Rural electrification was a major drive. There was a campaign to separate feeders, one set of feeders for agriculture, one set of feeders for the households in the Jyotirgram model of Gujarat was replicated in Madhya Pradesh, which ensured farm power. Then there were crop-specific support to crops like soybean. The whole history of how soybean came up in Madhya Pradesh. And then cotton, of course, was a major crop which again was supported. Flow of institutional credit. And of late, from 2008 onwards, wood grain procurement. Public procurement has come in a big way. And Madhya Pradesh's contribution to central pool was around zero at that time. There was absolutely no contribution of wheat to central pool. Now Madhya Pradesh is second, only to Punjab, in terms of contribution. So that huge state support has come, and dairy cooperatives also were supported by the state. The state support and agrarian capital came up in a major way. It flourished. And who are the agrarian capitalists, as I mentioned? Many of the top layer of this, I mean, the Rajputs and Brahmins, that hierarchy, ritually superior people were sort of removed. Landlordism was sort of eliminated, one can say. With some sense, one can say that. And the intermediate caste, the caste immediately below that, like Jats and Bishnois in the area that Mekhala Krishnamurthy worked, and OBCs like Yadavs, Kurmis mentioned earlier, Patidars in Western Madhya Pradesh, Khati or Khatri, what they called in Madhya Pradesh, we call them Khati, and Gujars. These castes came up in a major way. They led the agrarian revolution. So if you talk about Patidar in Western Madhya Pradesh, Patidar is three things together. It is soybean or wheat, and it is a borewell, and also a tractor. So the list of names that Barbara had put up, I added one more term there, which is tractor capitalism. Rudolph mentioned about bullock capitalism. There are no bullocks in Madhya Pradesh. They all disappeared. At least where I live, there are no bullocks. But people are working with tractors, and they seldom get down from tractors. You can call them tractor capitalists. So these are the ones who have come. There's one study in EPW in 2024, which actually talks about Hoshangabad, how this area changed. And as I mentioned, the big exclusion there is of Dalits, and in particular of Adivasis, tribals. Madhya Pradesh is a huge tribal state. Adivasi population is something like 22% of the total population, and they have been completely out of this whole realm of accumulation, and they have been also the receiving end of disposition. Many development projects have gone into there, like construction of Narmada dams, mines, and so on, which have displaced tribals. So the process is it's superimposed. One can see the kind of growth of agrarian capitalism is superimposed on a old structure, which has been changed marginally, tinkered with, but not substantially or fundamentally questioned. That kind of questioning has not happened there. Now we talk about commercial capitalism. I will not take much time on this. Along with the expansion of agricultural agrarian production, markets also developed, which is again Dr. Mekhala Krishnamurthy's work shows that. But even before that, the history of Madhya Pradesh can be seen in terms of a series of commodities which have been traded very extensively. In the second part of 19th century, there was expansion of wheat in Narmada Valley, which was exported. Then you have cotton. The growth of the many western parts of Madhya Pradesh again grow a large, substantial amount of cotton, which are heavily traded. Opium was another crop, which still grown in Madhya Pradesh, many parts of Madhya Pradesh. So there was a triangular trade, as you know. Chinese tea used to go to England, and British goods used to come to India, and Britain used Indian opium to pay for China's tea. So that kind of triangular kind of thing happened. A lot of opium is produced, and this has been marketed. So these have been traditional commodities where agrarian capital has been, the commercial capital has been concentrated. Now, after soybean and borewells and all that, commercial capital got a lot more opportunities, and many of the old landlords like Margusas became grain traders, and they led the commercial capital forward. So all these things have happened, and many of them have set up plants like soya oil plants and all that. Agro-based industries also have grown, which is another major way of pathway of growing of capital. Madhya Pradesh is also a very natural resource rich state. So many part of non-agrarian accumulation. The two things I'm talking about, agrarian production and marketing, can be seen as part of agrarian accumulation. Non-agrarian accumulation basically happens about nature, about the raw materials that we have. Madhya Pradesh has large stretches of forest, particularly in the eastern part of Madhya Pradesh, and a lot of minerals as well. Undivided Madhya Pradesh produced, I think, second to West Bengal or something. Largest amount of coal was produced in Madhya Pradesh, undivided MP. Even now, diamond mining. The India's largest diamond mine is located in a district called Panna in Madhya Pradesh. And that's a typical example of how development happens. You go to Panna, I've gone to Panna, you don't have a decent place to stay there. There's not a single good hotel one can look at. But it is the largest mine, gold mine in India, located in India, still thriving. Many studies are there on that also. And the various forms of extraction of natural resources have come into Madhya Pradesh, along with the development of agrarian capital in the non-agrarian sphere. So you have extraction of minerals like coal and many other things, of more recently of sand mining, that has become a very important activity. And it has a lot of political connections also. I've referred to Pranav's work on clientelism. That is very much applicable there. A lot of important politicians' names are normally taken. How these contracts are given. Timber contract is given to whom? Who was given this sand mining contract, etc. And similarly, forest produce. So using natural resources or using trading commercial capital based on extraction of natural resources like minerals and forests, that's a big form. And real estate, anyway, a lot of discussion already happened. Land becoming a asset and real estate coming up. This is an important form of capital. Now, the factors contributing to accumulation, what I mentioned is there. Basically, the pattern of accumulation is superimposed on a old hierarchical structure. The hierarchical structure has not been questioned. This is not Kerala. We are not talking about Tamil Nadu. We are talking about a state in central India, Hindi-speaking land, which is very, very hierarchical. But that hierarchy at the top has been changed. The new castes have come up, like the caste that I mentioned, Patidars and so on. And they have very strong connections with the ruling political party. There are only two parties in Madhya Pradesh, either Congress or BJP. And all these castes have very strong base within those. That's the kind of mobilization they have done. Unlike UP, where they set up a separate party, yes, within party they formed strong lobbies and got concessions. And clientelism, as I mentioned, many of those things are at work. And this is the kind of all based on this unorganized labor also there, which is highly exploited, mainly migrant labor, tribal labor. My last slide is about diversification of capital. I borrow this idea from Srishti. She has written a paper, she's here. She has written a paper on in Haryana. I find that idea quite interesting. If you actually look at it that way, moving beyond agrarian capital and commercial capital, there are many other new forms of capital which are coming up, which needs detailed study. We don't have much material on them. Dairying and small business, repair shops, that is one whole realm which has come up. Tourism is a very big thing, particularly ecotourism. Madhya Pradesh, as you know, has large forest stretches. Many of them have converted into tourist sites. Panna itself is a sanctuary, it has got. Painch is another sanctuary. There are many sanctuaries and national parks coming up. In fact, the place I'm living near Bhopal has been converted to a national park. So when area becomes national park, a lot of commercial capital comes in there. Hotels and many other things come there, and a huge amount of investment takes place. So these are the new sites of investment. A study I've mentioned there around study of Panna, sanctuary in Panna. So that study shows how protection of nature or conservation itself becomes some kind of a asset creation. How the catchy word that they have, but a term they use there is that protecting nature to sell nature, saving nature to sell nature. You are actually in effect commodifying nature, and a lot of capital is coming in there in that area. And also religious tourism. Ujjain is a big religious place. Omkareshwar, these are to do Jyotirlinga set in Madhya Pradesh. And both of them, Ujjain particularly has this Ardha Kumbh. Once in 6 years, they have a Kumbh. So that attracts a lot of tourists. And again, a huge industry has come up around that. Then interestingly, there are also many capital units, many groups who are involved in infrastructure development. I take the name of Bansal, I checked with them, it's not related to him. There's a big industrial group in Bhopal called Bansal. So they had started with industrial, this kind of infrastructure, road construction, and took contracts for that. Then they set up a biggest hospital. Bhopal, if you come to Bhopal, the biggest hospital is called Bansal Hospital. So that has been set up there. And now they are also moving into education institutions. There's a group of institutions that said, oh, they have a huge college called Bansal College. So this is also pattern of accumulation. All this is coming from basically from agriculture. They were all started as agriculturists. And education, they are all coming in. So there are various forms of regional capital coming up. So my last, as I mentioned, this is a very broad kind of whatever sweeping kind of statement I'm making. But what actually we need is to do more detailed kind of grounded studies on this. What are these actually forms which are developing? How they are developing? What is the capital going in? And which are the capitalists? To answer the question which is written in the opening document, who are these new capitalists? Who are the people investing, and where is the capital coming from? And if agrarian surplus has not gone into industrial this thing, where it has gone, it has to gone into these kind of diverse kind of things. And none of this is, it's not an Ambani there. There's no Ambani or Adani in Madhya Pradesh. There's not a big capital which has come out of any of this, but it's a dispersed kind of accumulation across. And in themselves, in those areas where you go to, the investment or capital deployed is significant. And they are very, very big players in that limited realm. That's, I think, we can say about the regional capital in Madhya Pradesh. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Anush and Sonal and other organizing committee members for uh, assembling this, interesting set of scholars who have such intersecting interests but scattered across countries and continents. And it's been very useful and very engaging session so far. Um, I'm Today I'm presenting part of my PhD work, which focuses on tries to center capital accumulation in the study of the rural, and tries to think around how we could integrate the non-farm economy and the caste, the issues that Professor Jodhka had mentioned in the first first lecture here in this conference. Um, the I'll, the roots, I would say that the roots of this project took during my time here at IIT, when I was doing my MPhil here, and Ramesh is here, Anush is here. They've contributed immensely in developing my interest in this subject. Um, so, what the main argument that I'm presenting today is that I'm interrogating two very strongly held notions. That first, that the impact of neoliberalism has been so strong on Indian agriculture that even among the better off sections in the rural have been adversely affected by neoliberalism, and which also came out very strongly during the farmers' protest, especially in the context of Punjab, where the narrative of in the context of three farm bills, this narrative of that we are all in the same boat kind of took precedence, and which also contributed to the success of the protest movement. And the second one is that there's been research that despite neoliberalism, there is capital accumulation, and Professor Vijay Shankar's research also shows that even in regions which have not been researched earlier, there is accumulation. But in the context of Punjab, it is considered that it is held that the Jats, the dominant agrarian class caste in that region, remain agrarian, which Harish Damodaran, if you remember the last chapter, he talks about the paradoxical case of the North Indian farming communities. So what I'm doing here is, through a comparative study of two regions in Punjab, I show that not only accumulation has continued in rural areas, but it also it is not entirely agrarian. In one region it is, in the other region it is not. So it's kind of moves beyond that, thinking of Punjab's case as paradoxical to, for instance, Andhra or Western Maharashtra or Gujarat. And I do this by engaging with two sets of literature. The first one is, and nothing new. I mean, Professor Jodhka outlined the agenda in the first talk. First is that the non-farm sector, the tendency among scholars who do research on Punjab is to focus on region which is predominantly agrarian, which is predominantly distressed, which leads to a certain conclusion. What I try to do is that I am summarizing or doing a review of the literature that has emerged on capital accumulation in the last decade, which has seen a revival of interest, in fact. And I try to put them together in a conversation and reach at a schema, basically, to help us understand and critically understand what is happening in rural areas. The second is that I'm trying to problematize the way capital accumulation has been understood, or the way capital accumulation classes have been understood, through almost always through economic variables and through economic terms. And I tried to see how we can take the conversation forward that has been happening around integrating caste, race, gender within class analysis. And to do that, I'll be using the conjugated operation framework that was used by Philip Bourgeois in 1988, but revived by Jens Lurke and Shah in 2018 in the paper, and also helps respond to some of the critique that has emerged that from within Ambedkarite spaces, that not looking at accumulation is also keeping the upper caste or the Savarnas outside academic scrutiny. So that has to change. Caste is not just about Dalits and Adivasis, it's also as much about the dominant caste. So the first contribution that I'm here trying to do here is that I'm building a schema here which helps compare accumulation patterns across regions, across political economies. And to give you an example here, for instance, And this is for rural accumulation, and this draws heavily from Harish Damodharan's field to factory, bazaar to factory kind of routes that he observed in his study. But it's slightly different from this, and I'll explain how. The first, for instance, a trajectory that I observe is the upward and outward trajectory, which we have observed. I mean, one of the most widely discussed, Carol's work on Andhra Pradesh, Mario's work on mainland Gujarat, work on Western Maharashtra, where surpluses, these were the regions which were early, saw early adoption of green revolution, agrarian surpluses, and they gradually moved outside agriculture. So think of the regions here in this category. The second is the outward and upward trajectory. Think of these as the regions which, for various reasons, did not, the agrarian classes did not accumulate much surpluses, but they saw an integration into a growing non-farm economy, and the agrarian caste class sort of integrated themselves into that. And we could think of the Western Tirupur belt as one of the main example here, but also more recently, I think Jens Lurke's work on Eastern Uttar Pradesh, where Thakurs moved away from agriculture, and the main source of their accumulation has become the non-farm businesses. Barbara Harris-White and their co-authors' work on Arunachal Pradesh also, I would think, fit well in this trajectory, where the main source of the main thirst of rural accumulation has come from outside the agrarian economy. Third is the upward but not outward. Think of these as the regions, the Harish Damodharan's, the paradoxical cases of North Indian farming communities, who did generate agrarian surpluses, but for various reasons were not able to or not willing to diversify into the non-farm businesses. And the last one is the neither upward nor outward. Think of these as the regions which neither benefited from any significant green revolution-based growth in agrarian incomes, nor have they been integrated in the neoliberal growth. So they've been excluded from both the post-colonial development as well as the neoliberal development. And the example of this could be parts of the dryland North Karnataka region, which was studied by Jonathan Pattenden, where the dominant class then has moved into government contracts or those kind of avenues to maintain their position in the rural hierarchy. The second set of literature that I'm trying to use here is the discussion on how can we integrate aspects of race, caste, gender within class analysis. In the West, there has been an increasing discussion on racial capitalism, which is a useful frame here. Cedric Robinson's classical text on Black Marxism, and which has been advanced. And in the case of India, you can think of Gail Omved's work, which has tried to, on a theoretical basis, tried to integrate both these aspects, and Anand Chakravarti's work, especially in the context of agrarian societies. And more recently, I think the conjugated operation framework that has been used by Lurke and Shah, which was first introduced by Philip Bourgeois, which says that in the context of a bypassed agrarian question, or in the context of a structural transformation which is no longer on the table, the class relations are very different, and they are co-constituted with the relation of race, ethnicity, caste, tribe, region, gender, space. But what I do is that because my focus is on accumulation, I try to advance that concept of conjugated oppression by developing its mirror opposite concept of conjugated privilege. And to define it, I'm inverting the phrase that Philip Bourgeois used for conjugated oppression by saying that conjugated privilege could be seen as when, quote, axes of caste, class, gender, etc. interact explosively to produce an overwhelming experience of privilege that is more than the sum of the parts. Now, on a theory level, this is quite a useful thing. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to put this into practice in analyzing an agrarian society, and to do that through a Marxian class analysis. I mean, there have been attempts earlier as well. Shrishti's work is one. Anand Chakravarti's, as I mentioned earlier, has also been a useful guiding light in that respect. What I'm trying to do is that I'm trying to problematize the analytical categories that we have used. Even Professor Jodhka mentioned earlier that the categories of capitalist farmers or petty commodity producers or peasants or laborers, they only tell us how these classes stand in relation to their labor exploitation and commodity production. But it is also important to unpack them in a way that they are also seen as possessing distinct caste identity with its own historical trajectory, which could also be of exploitation of others' labor power as well as other caste class privileges. So this leads me to a slightly more complicated, but I think more useful class identification, where I identify classes of capital instead of capitalist farmers or capitalist businessmen. I call them classes of capital and subclassify them into three categories. Conjugated privileged. These are the households, think of them as households which have had historical access to caste and class-based privileges. This could be, think of them as an ex-landlord who have had economic power, no history of their labor power ever being exploited or being oppressed, and they continue to be in that position. And this helps me distinguish those households, those people who have emerged in the last 3 or 4 generations, and that closely aligns with the introduction of green revolution policies in the region that I'm studying. So these are Savarna households who have moved up, who have displayed middle or lower peasant characteristics in the past, but now have gained capital and wealth in the last 3 generations, and now are exploiting others' labor power, are able to appropriate that surplus and also accumulate it over time. And at the same time, there were a few households which have history of their labor power being exploited in the past, but are now able to generate and accumulate surplus through either agriculture on capitalist lines or through non-farm businesses. So before I discuss the evidence on the accumulation, so I'm trying to add, put 1 and 2 in conversation and use the schema that we discussed on the agrarian accumulation patterns in the fieldwork regions to identify the patterns of those identified as classes of capital. So before that, I'll just briefly show the fieldwork regions. So I did fieldwork in 2 villages and 2 towns in Punjab. The first was in the Malwa region, which is more agrarian, more distressed. So you will get that story of agrarian accumulation in Punjab being entirely agrarian, which is also we have seen in case of MP. And the other was in the North Punjab region, in the Majha region, culturally Majha region, which has seen more integration into the neoliberal kind of growth that has brought to Amritsar. And this region that I studied was not very far from Amritsar. So you can think of it as a satellite. There were satellite towns that were being established close to this place, which gave the patterns a particular trend, a particular feature in this region. So I'm calling the Malwa village Kisangad, and I'm using the schema that we developed, and I see that in the new Savarna capitalist household, the trajectory is like we have seen in the other case studies of Punjab, is that they have seen an upward mobility, but they have not seen an outward mobility. In the case of the conjugated privileged households as well, they seem to be more diversified, but if you look, the tendency here is also to not move outward. The upward but not outward, and neither upward nor outward are the dominant trajectory. So the neither upward nor outward are those landlord households who maintained their position of, but now have not moved out of agriculture. But in sharp contrast to that, in the Majha study village, which I call Vyapargad, there the dominant agrarian caste class have right, okay. So the tendency is to move out. So 64% of those households who I saw them as new capitalists were basically main sources of their surpluses were non-agrarian. This was in real estate, this was in trading, this was in shopkeeping. So they start with smaller scales and then they expand their sources of surplus. Even in the case of conjugated privileged households, the tendency was to move out, But there were a few failures in that case, which shows in the 31.2% here shown, which but the tendency in general was to move out of agriculture. It was not seen as a source of much surplus here. So in this, so think of these as the two pictures that I show here are of people from these two regions. Both of them have the same amount of land. Both of them have the same amount of surpluses. But the one in the Malwa region prefers to remain agrarian or is constrained by the other factors in the non-farm economy too. Whereas on the other hand, this guy has moved into trading of agricultural machines, has a big showroom there, and the way they talk about non-agrarian accumulation is very unlike of what we see in the case of Malwa, Punjab. So to conclude, what I see here is that the classes of capital which I identify using the conjugated framework have continued to accumulate during this period of agrarian distress, the overall agrarian distress in the state, although with domination of different patterns in two regions. So there is no, the argument is that there is no universal pattern of capital accumulation in rural India or Punjab. Where, how, and if agrarian capital moves into non-farm businesses or the urban economy is also rooted in that region's long-run political economy, including in the urban areas and their relation with the urban classes in it. So the emphasis here is on the role of the non-farm sector in surplus accumulation of the rural. So the emphasis is on to move to also move away from doing field work only in the villages, but also to study the kind of work that Professor Barbara Harris-White has done for quite some decades, to integrate the study of the rural with the study of the towns and the census towns. And we've seen a presentation here before where the study on census town, how it enhances our study of the rural. Yeah, I think I'll just end it here. Yeah, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Anu sir, for giving me this opportunity. So, the contemporary transformation of India's economic landscape has often been narrated through the lens of neoliberal reforms, globalization, and the rise of new entrepreneurial class. Among the significant themes in this discourse is the emergence and trajectory of India's new capitalists, who are the regional, caste-based, and agrarian elites who have leveraged local economic surpluses to ascend into the realm of capital accumulation. Harish Damodaran, in his work, highlighted the role of certain forward peasant castes in this particular phenomenon, who actually came to be described as provincial propertied classes, capitalist farmers, and the regional capitalists, and various other names. However, the discussions on how caste intersects with capital transfer between rural, urban, and the regional circuits remain limited, and with notable gaps in understanding dryland regions. And also, to unravel the question of what happened to India's new capitalists, one must consider the historical context and the spatial and caste-based heterogeneity of economic activity and the changing nature of surplus accumulation before and after 1990s. The question gains further importance in the context of increasing monopolistic tendencies within Indian capitalism and the role of speculative aspects of wealth creation. And also, whether it is urbanization or the accumulation of capital, the focus always tends to be on major cities, like what many scholars also called it as metropolitan bias. So the role of small towns in the broader context of capital accumulation, urbanization is often overlooked. So now the question is, are they not significant, or can they be also considered as sites of accumulation process is the question. So like what actually, in the post-reform period, the cities were seen as engines of growth, sidelining the small-scale industries and the agrarian economy. And yet small towns have continued to rise, reflecting India's socio-economic transitions. What like Professor Jyotka sir is here, Jyotka and Kumar called it as a post-agrarian urbanism, and also subaltern urbanizations linked it to declining agriculture employment and also simultaneously limited industrial job creation. Like, irrespective of their centrality in the urbanization process, the small towns received less attention in urban studies research, like what as I already told you, metropolitan bias, like taking from the literature. So the present study attempted to focus on the small towns and their accumulation process. So if one were to see the reports by Hurun India, which curates the list of individuals with wealth above 1,000 crore and above, it reveals a significant number of wealthy elites originate from small towns. The puzzle is how. So what propels their growth? what propels their growth? I assert that the understanding the nature of big wealth requires attention to provincial businesses and their origins, because big wealth is not sudden. So if you go further, while some have benefited from the agrarian and mercantile surpluses, as seen in the case of South Coastal Andhra, and others have emerged through the Arak and mining contract, as observed in the Rayalaseema region of Andhra Pradesh. Suppose this explains the rise of the provincial property classes in the two respective regions of Andhra Pradesh. How can we comprehend the emergence of capitalist class in the case of North Andhra region? So, as I told you, for this purpose, Rajam town of North Andhra Pradesh has chosen as a site of investigation. The town was once renowned as a small-scale industrial town in Srikakulam, which is North Andhra, and served as a foundation for the rise of GMR, now globally known for greenfield airports and all those things. The town also highlights the decline of industrial activity, whatever the limited industrial activity, the small scale, and also the simultaneous emergence of the new economy. The question then arises is, how can a town with population of 50,000 odd sustain these economic activities and produce a global player like GMR? So while GMR story narrates one aspect of the entire picture, the emergence of new property classes unfolds much larger narrative about how capitalism is unfolding. Now in this particular paper, in the first part, I will present some data and broader generalization, and second, the provincial origins of GMR and different property classes, and third, expansion of secondary circuits of capital, thereby to argue aestheticization of provincial surpluses, how capital remains like provincial surplus confined to provincial circuits itself. So these are the largely research questions which I have outlined. Some of the research questions only I am presenting here. And methodology, if we will see in the question and answers. And this is broadly Andhra Pradesh map, and the Rajam location is that, and this is where I'm looking this entire region. So if you see these tables, this table and the following table, I'm not actually the tables are here, but the broader generalizations I'm presenting. So if you see the significant amount of manufacturing companies were registered between the late 1980s and early 1990, early 2000s. Most of them were established by Vaisyas. Vaisyas are equivalent to Baniya, they are Baniyas, they are trading community, and followed by Velamadara. And also the Vaisyas entered the manufacturing sector with the funds from trading surpluses, while Velamadaras and also the notable Turpu Kapus, they are OBC community now, Turpu Kapus primarily relied on political connections to enter into manufacturing sector. The second, after a slump in 2000s, 24 new companies have been registered in the last decade with a noticeable connection in the sectors such as chit funds, construction and agro-based, so indicating a sharp decline in manufacturing sector. Third, while Vaisyas registered more companies before 2000s, post 2000s saw the emergence of Turpu Kapus surpassing the Vaisyas in terms of number, not in terms of volume. So these are the broader generalizations, different kinds of other data is also there, but the same data I have presented. If you see this particular table, Vaisyas by volume, they're actually very big in terms of this thing. But if you see this Turpu Kapus and other communities, they are also there. And if you see, and GMRs based on these tables, if you see, we can actually characterize this particular the profile of Rajam town, socioeconomic profile like this, 1947-1977 trading. This is very important period because this particular period funded the later operations, for example, manufacturing, mills and all those things, 1978-2000s. And I will explain the story of GMR. We will understand why 1978, when he started jute mill and then later operations and all those things are very important. From early 2000s, it is mostly the service economy, especially centering around real estate and all those things, these things. And if you see the GMR story, GMR, he is from a trader's family. Their family was involved in brass, bronze, gold, agriculture kind of producers like grains, pulses and jute. Especially jute is very prominent in the region. So GMR joined family business with brothers as a partner. And in 1978, he established jute mill by taking over Sikh industry in Chennai for 2 lakh rupees. And then with the support of Kolkata Marwadi, he established jute mill in Rajam town. And 1978 he started, and in 1985 he actually, whatever the surplus is, like jute mill was actually successful venture. So the surplus, like cash flows that he was generating from jute mill, he invested in Vaisya Bank shares in 1985, and also acquiring agriculture lands in the Rajam and like in and around Rajam town. So 1985 to 1995, he was there in Vaisya Bank. He also went on to become director of Vaisya Bank after Ramesh Gelli resigned from that particular thing to start Global Trust Bank and all those things. But the key point here is 1995, when he exited from the Vaisya Bank, he could actually amass 500 crores of that particular whatever thing. So jute mill, it kind of gave a lot of surplus, which actually went into Vaisya Bank shares, which actually later dividended like 500 crores. That is one part. And another part is agriculture lands. Like nearly he owned 800 acres of land in Rajam town. Like later actually he established college, engineering college, hospital and different kinds of schools. Like he has quite a lot of land in Rajam town. That is one part. And another thing is, if you see, 1997 he started sugar factory. And in the sugar factory, the policies of the then government under Chandrababu Naidu, the kind of policies like privatization of cooperative sugar factories and all those things, like privatization kind of helped. And Amadal Valsa sugar factory, which was nearly like 40 kilometers away from this particular GMR sugar factory. This is a cooperative sugar factory. But the privatization of cooperative sugar factory and success of this particular Rajam's GMR sugar factory is not just coincidental. For example, the entire impeding of Ahmedabad sugar factory is because of the state policies at the top level, and also the local politicians also kind of helped impeding the functioning of Ahmedabad sugar factory. So that is also the time where the sugar factory established by GMR kind of saw a lot of success. So I'm not actually going into all the details of GMR. I wanted to only present his story from 1978 to 1995 or late 2000s, because I wanted to focus on the provincial origins. That is one thing. And another thing is, this is important also because what happened after that. And if you see in this particular thing, one part is his provincial journey, and also when with that 500 crores and all those things, Vaisya Bank, later dividends and all those things, what happened? One thing, he was actually shifting from provincial circuits to non-provincial circuits, and labor-intensive agro-based industries to capital-intensive infrastructure such as highways, power, airports and all those things. And in this particular trajectory or in this particular journey, it was facilitated by the provincial capital or provincial surplus. That is one thing. And also it is not like a Tirupur case where the provincial capital was integrated into the circuits of global, but it is a flight of capital. So that is the point I wanted to mention here, because it's because if you see before 1990s, the business landscape operated within a protected environment where only select few were granted license. And Kaliyarsan and Vijayabhaskar identified 3 ways of how monopolization occurred in India. Business houses used lobbying to influence state institutions, and also they leveraged first mover advantage to control access to capital, and also during import substitution development, they acquired production licenses to preempt competition and gain extra profits. So in the case of North Andhra region, where there was a scarcity of individuals with surpluses resources seeking to establish agro-based industries, the competition for licenses to set up various agro-based industries was naturally less. In North Andhra, the agrarian surplus was not enough to fund agro-based industry transition like it did in South Coastal Andhra. Few people like GMR who could enjoy way above competitive edge in North Andhra Pradesh. It could, like, only for certain individuals it was possible. So the economic reforms opened the opportunities for provincial business elites like GMR, and the provincial surplus facilitated this kind of a transition. And also around that time, the regional politics, coalition politics, regional businesses, like much of literature is there, like how it facilitated all those things. I'm not going into those things. But this is the key point. But what is important here is, while GMR's provincial businesses generated surplus, and that capital is being reinvested in the province itself till certain point, and the shift towards non-provincial businesses and infrastructure development had significant implication for the province, where most of his non-provincial, non-infrastructural businesses were located. So GMR initiated the process of disinvesting his provincial businesses to finance his infrastructural projects post-1990s. As a result, a significant shift was that he moved away from provincial circuits to non-provincial circuits. I'm actually not going into the full details again. So if you see, this is entire timeline of GMR and all those things. And also, okay, this is one part of the story, and that is related to GMR and all. But if you see the roots of business elites from peasant caste, like he was from a trading community, and if you see the other composition of business elites and all those things, we could actually trace the emergence of provincial elites to 4 roots. One is agrarian families with histories of experience in trading and business, and also agrarian families who invested in children's education, who later became different kinds of property classes. For example, doctors, lawyers, and different kinds of things, they invested in town properties and all those things. And the third is those who started as a petty commodity kind of producers, but later they made it, like this is a very tiny percentage, but nonetheless this is a character. And also the fourth one is those whose agrarian lands have transformed in the neoliberal framework. Means as the town expands, some of the agrarian lands transformed into the commercial properties and neoliberal framework. But the question is, how do they compete with the existing business elites? For example, in this case, Vaishyas. Now we have to see the sectoral analysis for this. For example, timber depots are there. Timber depots, most of the times, it is operated by Turpu Kapu, that OBC community. The entire OBC communities, like especially Turpu Kapus only operated. No Vaisyas were there in the timber depot business because it required different kinds of political networking, police support, and all those things which Vaisyas lacked at that time. And also first mover advantage. And also whatever this entire 4 routes happened, it is not without networks. The networks, caste networks, political, business, and actually in my thesis I have mapped out the kinds of networks and all those things, these things. And this part is very interesting again, the land rents, and if you see how land is shaping up in Rajam town and also most of the towns. If you see Rajam towns especially, as I told, like the most of the Vaisyas who are very prominent in trading, they have established various mills like oil mills, rice mills, different kinds of mills, and also different kinds of small-scale industrial units like polypacks, aluminum, synthetic, these kind of things. For that, they have acquired agriculture land to establish these kind of units. That is one kind of a thing. And post-2000s, most of the things is real estate. But in this particular case, Vaisyas, agriculture lands to industrial units, to establish industrial units, they have acquired agriculture lands, and those industrial units after decline, they have converted into real estate and all those things, that pattern. And for another thing is, most of the agrarian communities, it is direct conversion from agriculture lands to the real estate and these kind of things. Now, okay, with all those things, if you see, the speculative capital is there. What are the emerging features if you see? So, like in my thesis, I have developed a framework like brokers. Brokers are just brokers. Like they take 2%, 3% depending upon the prevailing situations. Broker come investors. These are very important category. Brokers come investors. They don't actually buy the land. It is short selling of the land. Like they pay advanced money and then they sell it. Like sometimes it changes 4 times, 5 times the hands. And property developers, they develop land like pure investors. They actually keep the land for future returns. They don't actually immediately sell. So based on this framework, this framework is very important to understand how do we unpack speculative aspects of all those things. And 4 features of speculative capital emerging from small towns is land is in circulation, that is land in trade. Like it is not for construction, it's not for any productive kind of product, it's in trade. And also, regardless of whether land is in circulation or not, it has already acquired the character of commodity. For example, the families, some agrarian families with certain kinds of flexibility, like for example, their son might be a teacher or some kind of a small business, whatever, they're actually holding on to these lands. And also when they convert, The land is there, but actually they don't actually sell it. And also they don't cultivate. So it acquires the character of commodity even before the sale. And also, the earlier, most of the things is, it is conversion is from agriculture lands to commercial, but actually most of the conversion is now from commercial to commercial. That is also related to land trade and all those things. And the last point is estetization of provincial surplus. And this estetization of provincial surplus is very important, because the estetization of provincial surplus, earlier, most of these South Coastal Andhra provincial property classes and all those people, because their surplus is from agrarian community, agrarian surplus and all those things, they could reinvest in towns and also cinema halls and later into big cities and all those things. But in the dry region of North Andhra, the surplus is generated from salaried employees and all those things. For example, teachers, doctors, lawyers and all those things. They are investing all those things in real estate only. They are not actually scaling it up into different kinds of other things. And also the neoliberal political economy, if you see, it always prioritizes big capital and all those things. Also leaves this real estate sector as a lucrative kind of things for provincial surpluses. And this assetization of provincial surplus, I argue, is also kind of making the surpluses confined to province itself, the entire surplus. That's why actually we are not able to see breaking of the provincial surplus into the circuits of non-provincial. I will stop it here. Thank you.
Okay, thanks to the three presenters. We had three really very rich papers and not enough time to get all the details of the studies. I hope we have a bit of time for question. But first we have Roshan Kishore, who is going to be the discussant on this panel. And Roshan is data and political economy editor at Hindustan Times. And he's been writing widely on related themes.
Thank you, New Political Economy Initiative, Anush, Sonal, for having me here. Let me, begin with a disclaimer. I am perhaps the only non-academic in this entire conference. You can actually call me a renegade economist because I spent time in a postgraduate economics department, but I stopped doing that a decade ago. And for a living, I actually try to talk political economy to people who do not study economics. So because I am a journalist, my audience is the intelligent layperson rather than the academics. And these are three very fascinating papers, and I'll discuss them in detail. But at the outset, let me apologize that some of the more sophisticated theoretical insights which you might have worked on, and I would pass them perhaps not because they are unimportant, but because I am not familiar with the literature and I would not be able to appreciate it. So please pardon me for that. And on that note, I'll discuss the papers in a different order because that is the order in which I received. So first we discuss Punjab, then we go to Andhra, and then we come to Madhya Pradesh. Let me begin with a basic question. Why am I a journalist, even interested in regional political economy? The answer which I have for myself is, that India's growth story, we are, neoliberalism and everything aside, we are still the fastest growing major economy in the world. We are second perhaps only to China in the world in the last 30 years, if a country has actually increased its GDP, etc. And while our structural transformation is far more stunted than the Chinese case or other East Asian countries have been, mass incomes continue to be low, employment continues to be a problem. But I think it is also a fact that India is perhaps the only other country apart from China where things have not gone south, things have not worsened for a very large part of the population. So while people might continue to be very poor, they might continue to struggle for, say, sustainable, respectable, well-paying jobs. I think it is very difficult to make an empirical argument that a large part of our population is actually worse off in material terms than they were, say, 20 years ago or 30 years ago or before the reform period. So that, I think, one can make that argument. And, once again, like I said, but basically there is a large income employment asymmetry in this country. Large part of the income which is being generated is in the formal sector. There's very little employment in that sector. This applies, both for the farm sector as well as the non-farm sector. And, this asymmetry is, of course, there across states, within states, etc. So you will have like a Bangalore versus rest of the Karnataka conflict. You have North versus the South conflict and all those things. And I think this is where regional political economy comes in, because unless you actually go beyond headline numbers and employment numbers in India, you will not understand what are the factors which are driving structural transformation, which are preventing it, what explains our remarkable political stability, that things are not exploding. So, the idea, I think, and this is the spirit in which I will discuss these three papers, is to look at, specific, focused, micro findings from these three very different states, and then see if we can actually, draw a larger picture out of them. So, let me come to the Punjab paper now. That Punjab's agriculture is in a crisis is a well-known fact. As somebody who lives in Delhi now, other people are also suffering because of what Punjab is doing, because it's not just low income, etc. There's air pollution, there are significant negative externalities, etc. But I think this the paper, I think the argument which has been made that Punjab has been in economic decline and agriculture is in a crisis. I think Punjab is also a very different state, at least in terms of its farm economy compared to the rest of the country. And I would spend some time on developing that context, and then maybe I would go to the. His Gaurav's paper actually has a chart which actually shows that Punjab's share in the national economy has been declining over time. He did not show it in the presentation, and it is true. So this is basically a chart which actually shows you what is Punjab's share in the all India economy. Is this not working? Yeah. And you can see that across agriculture, industry and services, Punjab has actually lost importance vis-a-vis its share in all India. So clearly shows that in the last 34 years, Punjab has not grown as fast as other parts of the country have. And this includes agriculture, by the way. But I think where we actually need to put a lot of context in any discussion on agrarian crisis in Punjab is that, and this is this scatter plot basically shows you this is from data from the Situation Assessment Survey, which is a very useful secondary data source the NSSO gives us. Even with all the crises in its agriculture, sustainability crisis, desertification, everything which is happening, Punjab is even today the most high income agriculture economy in this country across major states. So, this is basically monthly income per agricultural household. NSS defines, agriculture household as somebody who has a minimum stake in farming. The share of, the chart is self-explanatory, and basically the size of the dots, basically they show a state share of agricultural household, their share in the all India number of agricultural households. So Punjab is clearly a very high income farm economy even today. And, if you look at this data, this is once again from the SAS data, basically, Punjab is way ahead of all India numbers when it comes to farm incomes. So that is something which we still need to keep in mind. So even with all the talk of crisis, the average farmer in Punjab is materially significantly more well off than their counterparts in the rest of the country, especially the non-green revolution states. Why is Punjab so high income? Of course, there is a history to it, the enterprising farmer, irrigated areas, etc. But I think, the most important part of the story is what happened post-Green Revolution is that it enjoys the highest state support. So this is basically procurement data, and this is once again from the SAS data. The all India figures, all of us know that Punjab, if you were to look at relative share in procurement, say, share produced versus share procured, Punjab is way above. And basically, even today, I think, procurement is what is keeping the Punjab's farm economy alive, because you actually the biggest crisis which the model Indian farmer faces today is a crisis of realizing value, because prices fluctuate. Sometimes you have to sell at low prices, etc. But in Punjab's case, a significant majority of these farmers do not have that problem. They sell to the state at assured prices. That grain is procured and then distributed across the country. And like Vijay Shankarji's paper shows that states such as Madhya Pradesh have gained in terms of wheat procurement, but Punjab is still way ahead. So that I think is a very important fact to keep in mind. With this in mind, now I go to the conclusion of Gaurav's paper, and he's basically, he has discussed a lot of very rich theoretical literature, which unfortunately, I'm not sort of equipped to, appreciate enough. But the crux of the story is there are basically two regions in Punjab, two village-based field studies. Both, sites of field work, they are basically same caste farmers, but one of them, while they are actually thinking of moving into non-farm activities, the others are still committed to agriculture. The only question, which I could not answer was, now we know that, Punjab vis-a-vis other states has a very significantly higher state support, and it's not just procurement, because if you do input intensive agriculture, then even something like fertilizer, etc. If one were to, I could not come across a recent mapping of, which states gets how much of India's agricultural subsidies, but I'm sure Punjab is there. Now, I don't know what is the equation within the state. Is it the case that Malwa, which is the rich peasantry, large amount of land owning, agricultural households, do they have a greater share in the amount of procurement which is done from the state? And is it lower in, say, something like the Majha region, which is what the Vapargarh village in your study is? Because if that is the case, then it would explain a lot of what is happening here. Now, how does, say, the procurement equation within a state work? We know there are a lot of farm unions in Punjab. One can assume that they are by and large same caste unions, because a lot of the landed peasantry is Jat Sikh. So I don't know what is happening there. And I think it is an important question to ask, because I think it is also related to the fate of farming in Punjab. Because if you have to save Punjab's farmers from themselves, I mean this regime cannot continue. You cannot do rice cultivation. You have to move to slightly other things, etc. I'm not saying that you leave them to the markets, etc. But so much political capital has been lost in the farm laws that basically a new dialogue has to be started. And if it is a case, and Gaurav's paper actually talks about it, that in the large land-owning region where farmers are still invested in agriculture, they are not thinking of non-farm businesses, their children basically think of a future in Canada, not in the local non-farm economy. So if that is the case, then what incentive or stake do you even have to try and improve agriculture? Because that to me is a very hopeless situation. I don't know, what kind of a political, sort of trust building or dialogue you can even start on that question. So, that's there. But I think, like I said, the answer to that question, and I understand that this paper is part of a larger thesis, so maybe other parts of the thesis do answer it. But I think it would have been a good idea to at least give us some idea, because I think discussing Punjab's agriculture, the state of well-being of its farmers, without some kind of an empirical idea about what's happening to procurement and state support, leaves it a little incomplete. And the only other suggestion which I have in this analysis is, and once again, maybe it has been discussed in other parts of the thesis, that, when you're actually discussing agriculture in this country, I think it's a good idea to throw some secondary data at the readers also. I'm completely, I understand the importance of your field work, but the kind of numbers I think we have, and we have good secondary data in this country as far as agriculture is concerned. And the other thing is, even in your field work, I think it would be a good idea to give some idea of farm balance sheets, as to, so you have a share of who's going up and down and who is going to farm and non-farm, but how exactly do their farm economies work? How much debt, loan, etc. Maybe you have it, but it would have been a good idea to show that, I think. So these are the only things, I wanted to say about your paper. Let's come to Andhra. Ravi, I think perhaps the fact that Rajam is the hometown of the GMR's founder is what has inspired your fieldwork, the choice of your fieldwork basically. And your paper asks a very interesting question, that basically who is the provincial property class and what are the pathways we can expect them to take? If you were a journalist, you would have said, will Rajam see another GMR? I mean, that is the question you're basically asking, but not saying it in so many words. I think the paper I received had significantly less discussion about GMR because those tables, etc. were not there. So but it had a lot of other interesting stuff, which is what I will focus on now, I think. Ravi's paper, I think, has three major findings. One, manufacturing has become a low priority area in the post, not reform, I would say, but at least in the post-2008 period. And this is something which you can see from the company data which he has, that basically, 3 out of 23 manufacturing companies, the share of new companies in manufacturing has fallen drastically. And, 2008, I don't know whether it informed your choice, but it is also the year we basically associate with the global financial crisis. And the puncturing of the irrational exuberance sort of investment boom in this country, because then the export boom sort of died. So I don't know whether you actually deliberately chose 2008 or not. So that's one. And of course, service sector and other things are actually growing. The other thing which his paper shows, and which is once again self-evident from the chart he presented, is that there's now this greater diversity in caste composition of companies. So instead of so if you were to look, say, pre-2008 or 90s, basically, the traditional merchant caste had an overwhelming share. Now it's actually becoming lower. So more and more people are coming into it. And the third very interesting finding, which he did not discuss in the presentation, but is there in the paper, I think he says, is that whereas the traditional merchant castes are still very dominant in the local economy, their next generation actually is looking for exit. They are not interested in setting up new businesses. They would rather consolidate, but the idea that you set up something new, I think, is not really there. And, the new businesses are being set up by from caste groups where hitherto peasant caste groups are not into, businesses as such. So what do these three things, I think, tell us? Let us come to the first, which is low priority to manufacturing. One thing I think which is very subtly discussed in the paper is that I think, basically, and this is, more domestic reforms than I would say Washington consensus, that basically I think, and this holds for all parts of our country today, that the market is now going from local to national. there is no district level or state level market today, especially with things such as GST, etc., which has removed almost, all tax barriers, etc. We are actually looking into a national market. And I think there's a sense somewhere subtly in the paper that as, markets are expanding more, the local guys are actually realizing that they can't compete against bigger players. So, and this would hold for any other, like whether it is Bihar, UP or whatever, you can actually, buy goods which have been produced for a national market rather than a local market. So that's there. And I think this is one of the factors which is actually, sort of nudging local capital to get into manufacturing. That you will have to compete against players which are much bigger than you, who have much larger monopoly power, maybe even the ability to take losses, etc. Whereas, the low-end service business, which is where a lot of the people are getting, there I think there's a realization that these still have to be consumed locally. They have to be, you have to be present physically. And this is perhaps the only thing where, actually you still have a chance if you spend money. And like, this is anecdotally visible in this country. You go see a banquet hall, a local school, a local hospital, something else, etc. So rather than manufacturing, I think local capital is actually realizing that service sector is actually a more competitive sort of sphere for them. So that's there. Now the question is, do we actually expect this trend to increase? And if the answer were to be, if one were to answer this question in affirmative, I think, one of the biggest failures of our manufacturing story post-reform has been the failure of MSME. That basically, medium and small scale enterprises did not grow in this country. We could not employ so many people. Now, if this is what is happening, I think the MSME story is only about perhaps going to get worse rather than better going forward. And this is pure speculation, but I think this was an important thing. And the third question which I wanted to raise is, and once again, the paper had some discussion of it, is that, pre-90s, a lot of local people in, small agro-processing industries, etc., they actually were into manufacturing. And even if the business did not do well, they actually personally landed on their feet because, the way in which the assets were liquidated, etc., played a role. And this is something anecdotally which I have seen, in my state also, Bihar. Not that the two are comparable, but, you actually had state-owned, state government-owned development financial institutions earlier. And, a lot of those institutions used a lot of scarce taxpayer money, but because of, how local political economy worked, etc., I think there are very few success stories out of those experiments. I'm not for a moment saying state in development financial institutions is a bad idea, but what I'm saying is that is how the political economy worked. So maybe even the earlier attraction for manufacturing was perhaps driven by the belief that, even if entrepreneurially you did not succeed, maybe there was another avenue of sort of surplus extraction or generation where you actually colluded with the political leadership and sort of defrauded the state and hence the taxpayer. So it would be an interesting thing to see. I mean, the caste thing, Ravi's actually explained, in detail while presenting, so there's not much to say. The only question I want to ask is, as real estate becomes an important player, I think, does muscle power become very important? Like you said in the case of timber, etc. As a requirement of doing business, because you basically short selling. There's not really any enterprise involved here. You basically have to have muscle. You have to have access to land. If you're lucky, if a highway comes along your land, you strike a windfall basically. The more important question to ask is, I think, is this sort of dynamism, which is again not limited to say, a state like Andhra Pradesh or the field or the site of his field work. Is this going to be a windfall one-off thing, which will sort of taper off, once the first round of surplus accumulation has happened, and then you'd fall on bad times in terms of the local economy, or is this something where you can actually expect the surplus to be intelligently invested? And in a very interesting term, Ravi actually says, GMR getting out of Andhra to set up a national business is actually flight of capital. I would also ask whether it is a flight of enterprise. Because, if children of traditional merchant castes are actually getting out into the new economy and, and which is what, my last point is, because, it's one thing to say that you basically, start from a jute mill and end up as an infrastructure magnate in this country. But anecdotally, once again, I think there is evidence that a lot of children from what were traditionally merchant caste families, etc., they've actually given up on their traditional businesses and they built a professional career for themselves in the new economy, from finance to everywhere to all that. And I think they see an objective basis for that you will basically have a better quality of life, upward mobility for your children, perhaps much less nuisance in sort of doing the kind of business, etc., and do better. Because if that is happening, I think what you're also having is not just like a flight of capital, which is a question which arises. If the next generation of the traditional merchant families are actually going to be outside, the site of your local political economy, then of course, could be they will maintain a house here, but there will be one round of capital flight. But I think the more important question is, will there also be sort of a flight of entrepreneurship? I mean, who will be the typical entrepreneur in the local political economy, apart from the people who are basically buying and selling land? I think this is a question which is once again extends beyond the state or the city for which the fieldwork has been presented. The only suggestion I have, Ravi, is that it is useful to look at company data, and I'm sure a lot of hard work must have gone into it. Basically collecting data by caste and etc. But just the fact that you register a company doesn't mean the company do well or badly. So I think it would be a good idea, I'm sure you have it perhaps, but to present as to how these companies have done, how big is what company, etc. Because, I can set up a company with the minimum capital requirement, but it doesn't actually give me an idea of how successful or not successful that business is. So that's it. Professor Vijay Shankar's paper, I actually have nothing to say because, it is so comprehensive and I'm actually really looking forward to the book because, there are states like, Kerala or Bengal, etc., where Tamil Nadu, etc., where there is a lot of good literature to be read. And there are states like Madhya Pradesh, which are an intellectual black hole. Even as a working journalist, when I was reporting on elections, there was absolutely nothing to be read. And it does not for a moment mean that, things have not changed there. So I really look forward to the book. And I have 2-3 questions, more to provoke the audience, etc. What Shivraj Singh Chauhan has done in Madhya Pradesh and, the kind of political success story he's had, where even in the last state elections, he actually completely sort of crushed his opposition. I mean, is this really, we talk about a lot of models, there is the Bengal model, Kerala model, Gujarat model. I mean, is Madhya Pradesh the real undersold model for rural India? Where like his paper talks in detail, the state does its bit. There's nothing revolutionary about it. Basically landlords were allowed to fritter away. There was no class struggle, nothing. But 70s onwards, you slightly start putting in some investment. Shivraj Singh Chauhan actually doubles down on it in a very big way. You introduce some dynamism into the agrarian economy and then the market sort of takes over because you start from wheat maybe and then you are actually linked to the global market, stuff like soybean, etc., guar and all those things. So a lot of the Madhya Pradesh peasantry, especially the part Vijay Shankar ji comes from, is actually actively invested in global markets, that kind of thing. The other question which I asked at the same time is, or has this model reached its limits already? Because the fact that Shivraj Singh Chauhan went from being the poster boy of the dynamic farmer to basically please take 2,000 rupees and vote for me, it shows that the upward mobility, and this is not Shivraj Singh Chauhan alone, by the way. Every state government, central government in this country is basically doing exactly this. From PM Kisan is that will basically give you pittance, but we expect it to be so significant that you will be always politically loyal to us. So, I mean, what has this scheme done, this kind of a model done vis-a-vis, the larger political economy? This, I think, is a very interesting question. And, once you start doing fieldwork in Madhya Pradesh, and my fieldwork has been very limited because I traveled for one election, then you see that cracks start appearing in this, agrarian route to prosperity story. You have basically the cattle menace. I went to Madhya Pradesh in the 2018 elections. It was a period of a big downswing in global prices. So soya farmers were in a crisis, wheat farmers were in a crisis. So you can have market-driven headwinds, depending on what is happening to prices. You can have environmental technical headwinds. A lot of upward mobility came with BT initially. Now I think farmers are realizing that those gains are not sustainable anymore. You have stuff related to the environment, which is, not just in Madhya Pradesh, pretty much everywhere becoming increasingly sort of unreliable, erratic, etc. So what happens? And the fact that there's no big industry happening, there's nothing happening, basically all the industrial romanticism has actually died with the reform and, Chhattisgarh has become another state, so not even the mineral wealth is there. Where does Madhya Pradesh go forward from here? There are, I think, MP is again one of the states where some interesting experiments have been happening. For example, Shivraj was actually one of the first chief ministers to say, I cannot give you MSP, but I'll at least give you the differential, the Bhavantar scheme, which he did. Now there's talk about this in other parts of the country as well. So those things are there. And once again, to go back to Gaurav's paper and to come to Vijayji's paper, I do not for a moment say undermine the importance of bringing caste into models of accumulation, especially old school class-based formation. But I think what the farmers' movement in Punjab actually taught us. To me, let me put it in a very provocative way. It is perhaps the only successful farmers' protest in this country after reforms. No other protest has been able to achieve what they wanted. These guys actually forced the BJP, which has never made a U-turn on any issue so far from 14 till today, to take back the laws. It is a farmers movement which is dominated completely by the upper caste peasantry. Punjab is a state where there's no subaltern. I mean, there are Dalits, but there's no, I mean, traditionally no OBC assertion, and because there are very few OBCs in that state. Is it the case that had that, caste homogeneity not been there, and not for a moment undermining its exploitative potential, what it can do to people who are below in the food chain, can you have those kind of farmer solidarities? I think is an interesting question to ask, which brings me to Madhya Pradesh. I think a lot of Madhya Pradesh's political economy has also been influenced by the fact that there's no one dominant caste in Madhya Pradesh. I mean, there's not one dominant caste in Madhya Pradesh. Like say the Yadavs in Bihar or UP or other states, that's not there. There was no regional party in Madhya Pradesh. Largely it's been, I think, Congress and BJP. Now perhaps we are getting into a situation where there will be only BJP. I mean, Congress will be for namesake. But this actually allowed, I think, a political leadership, and Shivraj Singh Chauhan perhaps saw the potential that this is what you can do, where you actually, rather than like placating, say, a 20-25% core voter base, you actually see if things can get as broad-based as possible. So I think these are interesting questions to ask about Madhya Pradesh also. And let me end with basically saying that I think Madhya Pradesh is a significantly underappreciated, underlooked at political economy theatre if you want to actually understand what is happening in this country today. The larger takeaway from these three papers, and this is my last slide, when you look at them, the basic question which you want to ask is that do regional political economy theatres have any active conflicts within themselves today? Because one of the recurrent theme which is there in all the three papers is that people are not fighting among themselves. In Punjab, farmers are fighting against the central government or Ambani, Adani or whatever it is. In Andhra Pradesh, basically GMR has gone out. People are basically selling land, setting up something, etc. Whereas, go back 50, 60 years ago, and you actually had, to begin with, Andhra, you have actually had the Telangana land struggle. You had land struggles in other parts of the country. A large part of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, you actually had intercaste political economy battles in most states of this country. None of that is being talked about today. So that, I think, is something which is, quite fascinating to me. So what do you do basically? Are you just making sure that you're on the right side of whoever controls, say, the state's resources? Because one of the questions which has always fascinated me about regional political economy is, I come from Bihar, one of the poorest states in the country. Even in that state, to fight a panchayat elections, you can actually see people spending close to 30-40 lakh rupees. I mean, I'm sure the money is astronomically high in, say, richer parts, the coastal Andhra or Telangana or etc. Why are people spending that kind of money? What do they expect to get in return? I think, how are these conflicts or lack of conflicts being negotiated? I think that is a more important question which we need to, and this, this is just like loud thinking. The other thing is now, there is the Bernstein argument that, agrarian transition sort of became irrelevant for a economy because, capital would come from outside. I mean, have we actually reached a state 3.5 decades after economic reforms, things such as GST, etc., which have actually made the entire country a level playing field for big capital, that even local non-agricultural capital has actually become irrelevant. They don't matter. They can keep doing some of the local stuff, provide some service, banquet hall here or there, but basically most of the surplus generation will actually take place by big capital. The fact that a Reliance is actually opening shopping malls, etc., they actually, Hindustan Unilever or Procter & Gamble actually wants to deal directly with, say, Reliance distributors. I mean, have we actually reached a state where even this will become sort of, going forward completely irrelevant as far as the larger state of the economy is concerned? Of course, people will make a living somehow and all that. And, that brings me to my last question. If this is the way we are going forward, sort of formalization and greater concentration of capital, etc., and, you actually have no active political economy conflicts in the regional political economy. And do we see this changing? Do politicians just, make some meager cash transfers, etc., and buy peace, with politics? Or do we see a new alliance emerging? Because like I said, the only alliance which is actually, successfully challenged the regime was actually what, sociologically speaking, you would call a reactionary alliance, because it is a completely upper caste dominated alliance. So I think these are some interesting questions which I wanted to ask. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
So thanks very much to the speakers and the discussant for a really provocative intervention. Do we have time for one round of questions? 5 minutes we'll take.
I'm not a farmer, by the way, I don't own an agricultural land, but there are some facts which have been wrongly reported. 32% of Punjab population is OBC. Punjab has OBC population more than 30%, more or less equal to Dalits and equal to kind of, Jats are lesser. Jats are around 20-25%. 31 or 32% population of Punjab is OBC. They are landowners, they are small landowners. They are spread across. There are nearly 40 communities which have been listed as OBCs in Punjab. Second point that I think also was some kind of misrepresentation. Punjab is a state which has largest size of land holdings. Rest of the country or the country as a whole has 86% proportion of holdings in the small and marginal category. Punjab has around 30%. That is the difference, significant difference. Average holding in Punjab is nearly 3 times of the average holding in states like Bihar. So that is why household income in Punjab agriculture is much higher. Third reason is nearly 97-96% of cultivable land in Punjab is cultivated, and that is because of Green Revolution and historical reasons. So this narrative of that Punjab is prosperous and rich farmers of Punjab are protesting, and it is because state is pumping in all the subsidies to Punjab, and therefore Punjab farmers' demands are actually demands of the rich farmers is quite misleading. It's a daily elite perspective, and I think this needed to be kind of said. I'm sorry I'm putting it in very strong words, but this is something which is empirically, I think what you were saying is there are problems with that. Sorry for taking this point, but these are misleading facts that you were presenting as facts, not as formulations or not as opinions. That's why I thought I should tell you. I have a small question for Gaurav, and that was, why do you use the word Swarna for Jat 6? How do Jat 6 become Swarna? So I think one needs to also tune language to the local context. Jats don't fit anywhere. They are not really a caste. Historically speaking, they were actually called a tribe, and they come into the region in 15th, 16th century and become the dominant agrarian community. So these are dominant agrarians, and the so-called upper caste Hindus or upper caste Sikhs or upper caste Punjabis, they also would not call themselves as. So this is not a Brahmanic region. So I think one should kind of sensitize those categories. I had question for Viju also that is about the big capital. I think capital also has an agency. Right, we did, I think Ravi Teja was involved in that study. If you look at the Hurun list, the total big billionaires of India, Hindi belt is barren. So why does Hindi belt remain barren? So I think capital also has an agency. It goes where it wants to go. And that is also at some level agency of the global capital and of the Indian state. Thank you very much.
This is a puzzle that I have not been able to solve for myself, so I hope your book will, and if you could do it briefly just now, it will be very useful. It is this. Madhya Pradesh is a state which has consistently, over the last 30 years after the economic reforms began, along with the Hindi heartland northern states, grown slower than the southern and the western states. The average has been in the region of 5% per annum. On average over that period, while the southern states have grown at the rate of something like 7% plus. Now, yet, and at the same time, there are other constraints which you talked about, extractive agriculture. The institutions were not very different from that from the UP. Zamindari, Jagidari is still very much strongly present. So how is it that MP, that's my question, how is it that MP has pulled away from no more being regarded as a Bimaru state, because the health and education indicators have certainly improved, and its total fertility rate has come down below 2, which is, you cannot say for UP, Jharkhand and Bihar. What is it that has explained this? Will be really helpful if you are briefly able to dwell.
The first question is, Gaurav, you talk about the entire accumulation story, but you do not bring part dependency as a key factor in that, as in the sense, how does accumulation happen in certain cases and not? By mapping wage relations as a part of that. So where is that penetration happening? Where are farms fragmenting, and what kind of agrarian working classes are developing, and those specific relations to land? As in, where are kulaks present? Where are small agrarian holders present? So how do you map that into the conjugated class framework? And the second thing that I have to ask Ravi is the distributional aspect of this surplus that is produced. So how do you read that the getting organized and under specific circumstances, again, the part dependency 1% GMR getting out of that loophole which is the largest story of Indian capitalism. Because the state is not accounted for otherwise. Because you see, seriously, there are negotiations and the political domain is open. So the regional political economy to be free from contestation is something which is absolutely not the case. You have these regional contestations. So please map the state if you can.
So in my discussion part, that question was there, like basically like Kammas and Reddies, basically who are like before 1990s, around that time, many scholars like Sanjay Baru, Carol Upadhyaya, and also Harish Damodaran, all those people, they have characterized them as capitalist from below. And then actually when these two communities, Kammas and Reddies, they have become so prominent in the state and also so much entrenched in the capital and politics, they have become the capitalists from the above. Like thereby, that's what actually the regional political economy, the entire discussion, these two communities also hindered the prosperous of emergence of other regions and also other communities. That's why the capital question is also scale question, also relational. That's what I missed. Yeah.
Thanks for the questions. Professor Jodhka, I think that's quite a valid point. The only reason I used Savarnas for Jats, I mean, I'm aware of the literature that shows, Irfan Habib's work shows that, I mean, they've moved up. There's been quite a upward mobility from tribes to Shudra status to now being the dominant caste of the region. I think it was more for the presentation thing, and I was like, I mean, I have to. A lot of categories will make my presentation and the point that I'm making a lot more difficult. But I think I need to include the point that you just mentioned, that it is important to see them why Jats are not like other Savarnas. There's a long history of their movement. The other question, that's actually a chapter of my thesis, another chapter of my thesis, which shows how the differences in these patterns of accumulation in the two regions has distinct consequences for the laboring classes, where in the one region, where it is a more agrarian dominated pattern, there the laboring classes and their reproduction, simple reproduction, has also taken more into a PCP kind of, into petty commodity production, whereas in the other, they're more integrated in the urban economy as informal workers. So their exploitation has happened through that lens. So that has also changed their simple reproduction patterns. I hope that answers. Thank you.
Thanks for the questions. Unlike Surinder, I will not present any defense of Madhya Pradesh. There are many other people who are Madhya Pradesh scholars around. Dr. Mekhla is here. Louise has worked on Madhya Pradesh. Ritika is here. So we can have a conversation outside, the more rounded conversation, I think, outside on what the state is actually about. But about the agency of capital you are talking about, I think you are talking about the industrial capital. Is there a list of farmers anywhere available, rich farmers, who are the total? Huh? Okay, but that's industrial thing you are talking about. Yeah. But I'm talking about agrarian capital. I don't think we have a list of farmers who are the richest farmers in India. I don't think we have that kind of a list. But as I'm saying, industry, Madhya Pradesh is not there. Madhya Pradesh is very industrially, despite the effort by state, it has not grown. It's a very low thing. But I think in soybean processing, if you go to Indore and all that, there are very large plants, BP Solvex and many others are there. They might come in the list of, I think, if not 1,000, at least 2,000, they should definitely come. They are very quite big. So I agree, capital as a agency, it is not, industrial capital is not developed in Madhya Pradesh, but other forms of capital have developed. That's more interesting. And agrarian commercial we know, but there are many new forms like nature, capitalizing nature, selling nature, for example, commodification of nature. Many new things are coming up, interesting to look at. Now that brings me back to Santosh's question. I'm basically trying to answer your question in my book, if I ever write it. The thing is that Madhya Pradesh is seen as a black hole. What somebody mentioned, no, what is that? The conundrum of northern Hindi belt, where nothing happens. Madhya Pradesh is not a state where nothing has happened. A lot of things have happened. But in a larger sense of things, the change and changelessness, that is the kind of dichotomy that I'm trying to look through in my book. I think a lot of changes have happened. So the kind of changes that I'm indicating is the thing which are visible. And in terms of overall growth, MP has been growing very slow, but under Shivraj Singh Chauhan, we call him Mama Ji in Madhya Pradesh, under his leadership, the economy has been quite growing because a lot of focus on agriculture. So between 2005 and 2015, if I'm not mistaken, Madhya Pradesh was probably the fastest growing state in India. That's the kind of data as I've seen somewhere. I think it is going quite fast. But it's all based on agrarian growth. But then, having said that, it has not come out of Bimaru. There's another study by Dr. Nagaraj and a colleague of his, Chakrabarti, which actually asks this question: is Madhya Pradesh still in the Bimaru list or no? If you look at from the economic, whatever, the economic prosperity or income level, it may be out. But in terms of health and nutrition, health and education and nutrition kind of indicators, that's what I'm referring to, Ritika. If you look at Madhya Pradesh, it's still at the bottom. So it has not broken out of the Bimaru status. Even Rajasthan may have moved on, but Madhya Pradesh has not moved on anywhere there. It's still at that level. It has not happened. But the growth is basically because of this agrarian this thing and very strong farm support under the leadership of Shivraj Singh Chauhan. Which brings back to your point about this MP is a model. It's a model of sorts in saying that a state which is backward is showing some kind of a dynamism because of the state support, and it's an all-round state support. If you look at the package, actually the government has showed irrigation, then better seed, credit supply. It's like a green revolution package which has been extended to farmers. Of course, only the irrigation farmers got the benefit, and they have benefited. So it's a model of a certain kind of sort. But is that sustainable? I've written a lot on that. I've worked on this aspect of agricultural growth in Madhya Pradesh. To what extent is it sustainable? Because the entire growth in the western part of Madhya Pradesh is dependent on groundwater. And there's a very severe groundwater problem. I've written many times about that, repeatedly in many places. So that growth, even in a long-term sense, is not sustainable. And now what's happening in Madhya Pradesh is that farmers are demanding, in response to the world prices and collapse of soybean price and all that, procurement of soybean. I don't think it has happened anywhere. I can't think of any state where, Mikla can correct me, where oilseed has been procured. I think the support price was something like, they were asking for 6,000, they gave 4,800, and substantial procurement has happened. The farmers are a very powerful lobby. They're able to influence government. Government is able to respond under the leadership of Shivraj Chauhan Mamaji. So that is there, but is it sustainable? I don't think it's sustainable. But it has to diversify. I wrote a paper along with another colleague of mine in the EPW. It's about rice cultivation in the non-traditional parts of, this is something like a Punjab model, non-traditional parts of Madhya Pradesh, where rice is not a traditional crop, eastern part, but the central part, Hoshangabad area, Hoshangabad rice in those kind of areas, where rice is not a traditional crop. So we wrote a paper saying that due to procurement government support, the thing has grown. My friend Darwin Sazana and we wrote it together. But having done that, that's actually creating a lot of problems. So we titled the paper as a missed opportunity. Madhya Pradesh actually has an opportunity of an all-round development, including many crops, many farmers, many areas. But the growth currently is focused on irrigated crops, that too in central and western Madhya Pradesh, and largely run on groundwater irrigation, which is totally unsustainable. That's my. Thank you.
It's significantly lower than the all India share. I mean, the all India average of share of OBCs would be much larger than 32%. That was the only point I was trying to make. And on the other characteristics of the Punjab peasantry, we are actually on the same side. I think you took my sarcasm without it, basically. What I'm trying to say is that, there is I'm not saying he's doing it deliberately, but there's this sense that, all of the Punjab peasantry is basically upper caste and therefore, reactionary in nature. No, we actually wrote a paper in the EPW during the farmers' protest that this is actually the peasantry which has sustained the Green Revolution. Now it is in a crisis of its own making. I think the most interesting question which Gaurav's paper brings out is what incentives do you have to even nudge them to reform? I think that is something which I think politicians and the Punjab peasantry struggle to answer, and that is perhaps the more important question. Now, of course, Punjab is more resource intensive, highland, etc. And the only point I was trying to make is that his actually paper begins with the first chart by Shamika Ravi, which shows that Punjab has completely collapsed and all those things. Whereas that is not the point. Even in its greatest hour of crisis, I think Punjab agriculture is significantly more prosperous than what it is everywhere else in this country, which actually underlines why we should not throw the baby with the bathwater.